Welcome, welcome, welcome to Awakening Potential Podcast, your gateway to the extraordinary. And today we're featuring this amazing individual, Savio P. Clemente, who has mastered turning everyday moments into milestones of wisdom. His journey from battling stage 3 cancer to becoming a board certified wellness coach has shaped his mission to empower individuals to embrace a healthy, wealthy, and wise lifestyle. So align with who I am, why we're here. He shared many insights through best-selling books, impacting the world as a media journalist, collaborations, and recently, which I can't wait to hear about, his TED Talk. That's on my bucket list for sure. Savio embodies the transformation from ordinary to extraordinary, making him the perfect guide for today's exploration. Join us as we delve into his transformational journey and glean insights to elevate your own life. I'm so excited. Let's embark on the enlightening journey together and welcome Savio Clemente.
What a beautiful intro, Karen. Thank you so much for that. I'm so
Yeah,
excited to be on the podcast with you today.
thank you. It's such a pleasure to have you here. Um, Tell us a little bit, if you would, because we're in a conversation to really raise conscious awareness out there in the world. And there are a lot of clients that I've worked with that have very low self-esteem, self-worth. So really realizing that we all have our journeys and we all have our stories, and we take that, but yet from ordinary, we're able to get to choose to create extraordinary. And I'd love to hear a little bit of your journey before we get into all the juice.
Okay, so I was not born in the US. I was born in India, in Mumbai, India. I came to the States when I was 3 years old. My parents are actually from Goa, India. So if you know much about India, Goa was ruled by the Portuguese for about 400 years. So when people look at me and look at my name, they're always confused. They're like, it sounds Spanish. It sounds, and I'm like, that's because of the Portuguese influence. So in any event, we immigrated to a small part of New York called Westchester County. It's about 40 miles north of New York City. And it was a really nice upbringing. I'm going to date myself here. So if you ever heard of the show, The Facts of Life, it was taking place in a small town called Peekskill. I actually grew up in that small town. I went there for both elementary school. I was raised Catholic, so I went to an Catholic elementary school, high school, and then I went to college in the big city, New York City, and it was amazing. And it was that I had a turning point in my life in terms of belief system. So I grew up Catholic, but I always wanted to just explore other belief systems from Buddhism all the way to spiritualism. I just felt like I just wanted to just learn about it and expand my awareness and my know-how. And then in college, I graduated with an IT background. So I was part of the dot-com bubble, so to speak, that also crashed, by the way. I experienced 9/11. I lost a really good friend in that tragic day. And from that, I was trying to figure out what is next for me. So I teamed up with a bunch of individuals. We formed a production company. For over a decade, I gave my heart, soul, and finances to it, and it just didn't work out.
Mm,
And then in July of 2014 is when cancer entered my life, and it really rerouted this ability for me to see deeper,
mhm.
and also for me to confront things that I think I was just too afraid to do.
Yeah, I so get that. Yeah, we all have our stories, we all have our challenges, and I believe, seems to me, that a lot of times it's a wake-up call. Whether it's that, I broke my hips in Costa Rica,
Ooh,
riding a horse, doing what I love doing, but it was
wow.
it was a wake-up call. And each part of the journey, it wakes up a different part of myself to say, whoa, pause, time out. Like, what are the messages that I'm not hearing? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And I'm curious if you had those same messages. I'm asserting you did, to go on to do a TED Talk, and have you authored a book yet or anything like that? Or
I I have. So the most people want to know the juicy part, which is the
I'm
cancer
gonna
journey.
whatever
And
you want
so
to tell us.
the way that worked out for me was I was in this partnership with other people. And to be honest with you, Karen, I just didn't have the courage. to tell them it wasn't working. It wasn't working for them in their own personal lives, but it just wasn't working for me. And I just didn't have the courage because it was a passion project. It was a mission project. I felt deeply rooted to the project itself, and that's why I gave all I could. But sometimes in life, you can give and give and give, but if it can't be received, then it's
Yeah.
like you never gave. And
Yeah.
so outwardly, physically, I was doing everything right. So I was exercising 6 days a week. I was taking vitamins. I was a long time meditator, meditating 20 minutes a day. The Passion Project was sort of spiritually focused, so I was in that realm as well. I was eating organic foods and doing everything right. But emotionally and mentally, because of that taxing situation, I'm not saying it was the cause of my cancer, but it just didn't help. And so I was on a trip with a friend to Amsterdam, Paris, and London. And I kept noticing these deep night sweats, like they were just drenching night sweats when I was there. I'm like, that's odd. I'm like, okay. So I came back to the States, started having them again. And then all of a sudden, my stomach started getting distended bigger and bigger. At that point, I was seeing a naturopath for about a good 8 to 10 years. And he looked at my blood work and he's like, Savio, there's a few things, my friend. You really need to seek mainstream medicine here. I suggest you get a sonogram. I'm like, a sonogram? And he's like, a sonogram. I'm like, okay. So I get a sonogram. They wouldn't let me leave the office for an hour and a half. Finally, they told me to get a relative to pick me up. And I'm like, I came here with my own card. Like, get a relative, go to the hospital. I'm like, okay. Go to the hospital. They admit me an hour and a half later to the fifth floor. And later that night, I find out from nurses that I would be transferred to the seventh floor, which they call the cancer floor. So that's when
Mm.
I had an idea it was cancer. I didn't know what it was. It was only until the next day when they had to put a nephrostomy tube in me, and the doctor whispered in my ear, unfortunately, it's DLBCL, which is diffuse large B-cell lymphoma, stage 3. But he did say, interestingly enough, that if there's a cancer to get, this is the cancer to get because we have the biologics and the immunotherapy to help it. We have the stuff to make you better. I was bedridden for a week because of the nephrostomy tube. And then 3 days before I left the hospital, so I was in the hospital for a total of 15 days, the medical director came to me and she's like, we need to have a face-to-face. She's like, listen, I know your health history. I know you're someone who doesn't even take aspirin, but I'm telling you right now, if you do not take your first round of chemo, I don't know what's going to happen to you. I'm like, Doc, it's that serious? She's like, it's that serious. I'm like, okay. And that's when I relied on that good friend of mine who has a lot of packed wisdom. And I told her, and she's like, Savi, you sure you want to take chemo? It ravages the good and the bad. You sure you want to do this? And honestly, Karen, I didn't have an answer for her. I
Right.
actually had to go within, and that's where the spark came for this TEDx talk, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. I had to rely really on my own inner wisdom. And what came to me was a flash of insight. This happens to a lot of people
Yes.
where they're pushed to the test and somehow they just
Yes.
create this wisdom comes to me. And it was a movie a snippet from, and you might have seen it. Keanu Reeves, he played Siddhartha. So the movie was called Little Buddha. It was in the early 90s. And in
Hmm.
it, it's the story of little Buddha and Keanu Reeves as Buddha. Um, Basically gives up all his worldly possessions. He's meditating with two other ascetics. They're living on basically next to nothing, maybe a grain of rice a day, and he overhears while meditating two individuals on a fishing boat. And I talk about this in my TEDx talk because it was so pivotal. And it was an older individual and a younger individual. And the older individual had an instrument in his hand and told the younger individual, if you hold the string too tight, it will snap. And if you leave it too slack, it won't play. The path is the middle way. And it was like, I'm like, oh, I can say yes to this doc and I can still do what I need to do. So I made a vow and a promise after my first round in the hospital, 5 other successive rounds every 3 weeks, that within those 3 weeks, I would do a whole bunch of integrated modalities. So I explored everything from energy medicine to ozone therapy to the black seed oil, reading the Quran. I set up a Google alert. I did everything I could. And I said to myself that as long as I do my part, which is not only because the doctors are doing the physical things, right? There's nothing I can do besides being okay. And so I reframed the chemo as an elixir. I said, instead of it being a poison, I'm going to see it as like mana from the universe, as an elixir, something to cure me rather than something that's going to destroy things within my body. And
Right.
then also what came to me was this idea that my physical body is dying, and that was the stranger. It was those aspects of myself that I didn't want to confront, like fear and shame and vulnerability. And Brene Brown would have a field day with me,
Yes.
with
That's what
with
I
all that. And that was the origin story of that.
yeah.
Um, but I
I,
can talk a little bit later about the onset of the book and how that progressed from there.
yeah. So where are you now, if I may ask, with the cancer? Did you, get through it? Is it behind you at this point, or what's up with that?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So in July of 2014 is when I got diagnosed. I did the 6 rounds of chemo in addition to a whole bunch of integrated modalities. 4.5 months later, that same year, 5 days before Christmas, I was given my remission status. As of this past December of 2023, I am 9 years in remission. This July will be 10 years since I got diagnosed. And I said to myself that if I overcome this, if I find a way through this, because we all have our own personal crosses to bear, our
Abs-
own battles to confront, that if
Absolutely.
I get through this in 5 years, because it's not a guarantee, but after 5 years in remission, it's less likely to occur. It can always occur. I lost many people to the battle, so I'm not underestimating the the ferociousness of what cancer is. And mine was a blood cancer, so I didn't lose body parts. Like I know people who actually lost breast and throat
Yes.
and
Yes.
liver and colon, and it's terrible because you
Yes.
can't pretend that it's not there anymore. You have to live with that. So I don't take it lightly. And so for me, that's where I'm at. And I said to myself, I'm going to do something with it because I felt like this came into my life. Whatever the cause of the effect is, there's people who do so many things, and I believe that truth can be found in many different ways, but I just don't have access to that truth. So whatever the cause of the effect is, for me, I had to respond to what was happening to me, and the response for me was, what can I do to create this to be a mission for me? What can I turn this lesson into a dharma for me? And so that's
Love
when
it.
I started on doing a whole bunch of stuff, which is getting my board certification, getting my ICF certification in coaching, being really good at what I do, which is helping individuals overcome adversity in their lives, create that new version of themselves, allow themselves to be new leaders in the new world by allowing people to follow them based upon what they themselves have seen, gleaned, and overcome.
I love that. I love what you're up to because the same thing has inspired me. It was my divorce that first started me on this path
Yeah.
because it was like I refused to be anything less than I know myself to be because I was in that space of not enough. And then illness, it began with my mother's illness and she had blood cancer. And ironically, both she and my father had been divorced for 38 years and they both died of the same four rare blood diseases. Tell me that's not weird,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
So I remember my brother saying to me, Karen, I found mom's books, and she was a bit of a hypochondriac. She was a hypochondriac, not a bit of, your brain from brain science will tell us that, whatever your brain is hearing, it will take in and look for evidence to make it the truth. So what we're reading stands to reason that the same would happen. And my brother said, "Oh, I've got all these cancer books and all those. Do you want them?" And I went, "No, I don't even want to look at them. Keep them away from me." And it's like, no, that's not my story, And I really believe that we have the power, it's also biblical, right? We have the power to heal ourselves. The mind is a very powerful tool. And I love what you're doing with it because I knew I could only speak from my own experiences. Um, and I love the word you use was you responded to it. Responding rather than reacting to it is a huge difference. And the resilience comes in that space because we're thinking clearer. And I love the fact that you're also sharing it with the world because I don't believe the gift was given to us to hold on to, but rather to be a contribution to others who are going through some similar or whatever challenge. But I really honor it. I really honor it a lot. And I always look for the silver lining in everything,
Yeah.
no matter good, bad, or indifferent. It's like, what's the silver lining? What's the message? What am I to learn? Those are questions I ask myself all the time. What do you ask yourself? Or
Uh,
are you,
I echo that same sentiment. I mean, when I was transferred to the seventh floor, they call the cancer floor. I said, what's the connection here? How am I connected? I know we have different cancers, different ages, different ethnicities, but what's the
yeah,
connection here? What are we all experiencing at this moment in time? And I had 4 roommates in those 15 days in the hospital, and 2 of them had brain cancer. And one of them actually came in really late. He was the last person. And he kept arguing and screaming at the nurses and doctors. And I talked to a friend about it. And I'm like, so I said to him, like, can I just ask you? I said, I don't know you and I don't want to intrude. But so he had radiation the next day, but he wanted to leave. He wanted to leave the hospital. And I'm like, what are you rushing home for? And he's like, my dog's there. And I'm
Mm.
like, okay. And so I talked to her, that same friend of mine, and she's like, Savio, you don't get it, my friend. I'm like, what do you mean? She goes, you have a different perspective on this. You're thinking the vision. You're thinking about getting out and doing. He's thinking he's gonna die. He
Yeah.
needs, and I'm like, oh my God, it was a great lesson of compassion and empathy for me. I'm like, oh, I
Yeah.
have to meet him where he is. He's at that point. I can't look above that point for him. And so I honored that experience from him. But I'm the same way. I I said to myself, this is, people often use that phrase, it's not happening for you, it's happening, it's not happening against you, it's happening for you. And that's true, but when you're in a crisis, like cancer is a crisis, especially because it's like a snowball effect. Once a doctor gets into your hands and they see the cancer, it's just you have a care team, then the care team grows, and then they come in and they do these tests and they do more tests. And I didn't have the option. When someone tells you you have cancer, you have the option to say, okay, can I get a second opinion? Can I, can I think about it? Can I, I didn't have any of that. Fifth floor, seventh floor, nephrostomy tube, bedridden for a week, first round of chemo. Like it was just that fast.
Yeah.
And so for me, all I had was myself, my learnings, the teachings that I hold dear, my spirituality. But for me, I saw that physical body dying, but I'm like, my mental acuity is still there. I'm still creating in my head. My emotions were still alive. My relational aspect, my friends and family came visit me, were still there. My dreams were vivid. And I'm like, how can I pull that part of me, that physical body that's not doing well at the moment? How can I pull that? And that was the origin story of my TEDx talk. So my TEDx talk was called 7 Minutes to Wellness, How to Love Your Inner Stranger. And people ask me, what is this stranger thing? And the stranger for me was the guy who was dying. It was that shame, vulnerability aspect of myself that I just didn't want to hold on to, that I felt like I couldn't be seen for being less than in that way. But
Yeah.
other people describe the stranger, someone's like, it's that person that they want to aspire to be, but they just somehow can't grasp to it. Someone who I know who's into Buddhism said that the stranger to them is their past life, is a past life that they just can't shake off, they can't overcome, that they're trying, but they just can't. It's just too much, it's too powerful. So I leave it to people for interpretation. The last person actually even expressed that the inner stranger to them was this aspect of the physical, right? We're living a physical immortality, like we're living in this world, but the stranger to them is that divine self that's even more, that's immortal, that can never die. So I left it on purpose, and I wanted people really to latch on to this idea that, and I say this, I echo this in my talk about this idea that to heal thyself is to know thyself. It's an ancient saying, but it spoke so
It's,
volumes to.
uh, I speak that all the time. You know, Shakespeare talked about in 1833 in Hamlet, to thine own self be true. When you know yourself, you know others. You know how to maneuver through so many different things, how to respond to so many different things in your life. Oh, you're the first person I've spoken to in a long time that'll you're seeing it, Mike, soon. So I love it. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's so true. So you've done this TEDx talk, and congratulations for that. That's
Thank
still on
you.
my list. Where did it lead you? What's next?
Yeah,
And
yeah. So after my coaching certifications, I was on a tutu train, by the way, because I wanted to be really good at what I did. I was always a writer, so I pitched an idea to my editor. I was like, "Can we do something about cancer survivors?" He's like, "Oh, that's interesting. Okay." So he thought of a great title. I survived cancer. Here's how I did it. At this point, I've interviewed 200 cancer survivors, all walks of life, different types of cancers. And then he came to me. He's like, "Oh no, no, this has to be a book, my friend." So we published the book under his publishing arm. And 5 days before, actually the day before my birthday, it became a bestseller in four categories, which to me meant that the story
congratulations.
of hope survived. It's not about the accolade; it's about the actual message. And so,
Exactly.
and so that survived. And then from there, so many doors open. Like I've interviewed celebrities like Venus Williams on the role of wellness because people see her as the epitome of sports, but she talks about her gastrointestinal issues, and that impeded her ability to perform. And so she launched a brand called Happy Viking. I interviewed other people like Ice-T and Carson Kressley and Deborah Messing, all on this role of what is illness, what is wellness? Is wellness above illness? Is there a continuum with that? There's something called the Travis Illness Continuum. And so my editor trusts me. We've flown to Italy to experience a wellness resort. I went to India with National Geographic this past December, 8 cities in India.
Ooh.
So those things really allow me to see that I don't know if I would ever classify cancer as a blessing, because it's not, when you think of a blessing, something that's bestowed upon you that you're really excited about. But I will say it opened up such a door for me that I would not be able to create half the things that I created from what happened to me. And I just used it to empower myself, because I feel like if I can empower myself, other people can find a way to empower themselves as well. And then with the TEDx talk, I really, beyond that aspect of the stranger and to know thyself is to heal thyself, I really created a framework, and I made it very simple. And the root of it was in my search for healing, discovered a Hawaiian healing called Huna healing. And from that, there's an offshoot called Ho'oponopono.
Yeah.
And I had to make it very simple, because the TED guidelines are very clear that everything has to be documented or reported or vetted. And so for me, I really wanted people to understand this idea of how can you create a quick level of inner knowing and healing and tapping into self. So I called it the Aloha Reboot. So it's an acronym. So A stands for acknowledge. Acknowledge where you are in the present moment. Don't pretend. Don't try to falsify what you're experiencing. Just acknowledge. L stands for listening. So listen to that inner voice. In Huna healing, they talk about talking to the different body parts. I use work in my coaching, which I call the three brains, the head, heart, and gut, because
Yeah.
there's anecdotal evidence that says that that speaks to us. There's language, there's consciousness there, there's knowingness there. And the heart, we buy with emotion. So there's definitely evidence for that. O stands for opening, which is part of the Ho'oponopono, which is open yourself up to self-compassion and self-forgiveness. That was huge in all my interviews, because when I asked cancer survivors in my interview series, I asked them one pivotal question. If cancer had a message for you, what would that message be? And they were like, what are you talking? I want to get it away. I'm like, no, what would that be? And some of them said, I think it was about for me to catch and release, to let go of things that I just held on to for far too long, because
Exactly.
it already happened. H stands for harnessing. So harness what you've gained and garnered. And A, the most important, is to act with inspired action. It's to create those movements. It doesn't have to be big steps. It could be just small,
Exactly.
everyday, tiny steps.
Love that. I absolutely love that. And I couldn't agree more with all of that. It's interesting because I live here in Florida and I go kayaking a lot and I do the Ho'oponopono every single.
I love it. I
Right.
love it.
And
I
it's
love it.
like the rhythm. It keeps me in rhythm. It's always, for me, I feel it's always great to check in with ourselves anyway. And there's always things that we could forgive, and it's not that it's a make wrong, it's just, and a lot of it, we don't know what we don't know until we know it through the awareness. And then we choose to release it. So once it's released, it's like, that weight, and then we get in the flow. So
Yeah.
I do a lot of metaphors
Ah,
related to water. Obviously, I'm a
ah,
water person,
yeah.
horse person, so I relate to all of that. It really has certainly gotten me through a lot. Is there something metaphorically that you align with that supports you getting through your journey when things get a little more challenging?
I think it's probably two things related to that. So one of them is this idea in, Chinese philosophy, which is basically come in with an empty mind. So I know it's hard, right? You're great at what you do. We're experts at what we do. There's a lot of knowledge, training that's in there. We want to make sure we get it right. We don't misuse the language. But I like to come into a conversation with someone, whether it's coaching or even my interviewing as a journalist, and just be present to what I'm actually sensing and feeling from the person, what they're actually saying and what they actually mean to say. So that's the number one. And the second thing is something I learned very early on, which is this idea that you can't fill a pot that's already full. The pot has to be emptied in order to fill it. And it sounds so simplistic, but it's really difficult, because the stuff that we're filling are stuff that we want to cherish, the stuff that we love, probably some painful things as well in there. But in order to just be fresh and in order to just be alive and in order to just react to things in our physical world because we're having a human experience, not a spiritual. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. So therefore, it's really about letting that pot emptied and refreshing it consistently and constantly. And so that's a work in progress. I by no means am I saying I'm excellent at that. I think I'm good at it, but I can always be better.
And we can always be better, right? The fact that you're choosing to at least look at it and choose to at least see what potentially you could take out of that pot. And because when you put more into it, right, I find more joy, more experiences, more laughter, more play. Yeah, it works for me. It certainly works for me, and life has been a journey when we open ourselves up to it and not get into the victim mode like, woe is me. And I certainly heard that was not in your case. And now look where you're at. I think it's just absolutely brilliant. I really honor how far you've come. I'm sorry you had to, get the kick in the butt to get it. But sometimes the universe just says, you're not listening. Wake up, wake up. And I find that coming from a nursing perspective, I'm a nurse by trade, and I chose to go into more of the holistic. And I started looking at the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual as well. And my experiences have been that the universe is constantly saying, you're not listening, you're not listening, and it slaps you. Your body is always talking, always talking. And if we choose not to listen, things happen, right? Things that we don't expect. And when they happen, it's how are you going to respond to it in kind rather than react? And my experience has been when we respond to it in kind, right, with compassion and love, things seem to go towards the positive aspect of it rather than the negative demise. So food for thought, right? And um, what might be something that you'd love to leave the listening audience with? Like something that will really make inspire, from going from the ordinary to the extraordinary.
There's a few things when most people don't really want to talk about feelings or emotions. This last thing they want to do. And I'm very clear that I am a coach. I am not a therapist. I know my lane. Therapy usually goes into trauma and the past, not always, but most of the time. And
Yeah,
coaching is really where you are, where you want to go. It's that vision. Vision is not a goal. It's how you want to feel, how you want to be, how you want to express yourself. What is it that you want to create? What is it that's the ideal? Because in coaching, it's not just a conversation, it's a conversation with a purpose. We have to have a not an end goal, but some level of understanding that we are reaching to some level and point. And they say often, well, you talk about all these like namby-pamby feelings, and I'm like, okay, you want to get into the science of it? Let's go into positive psychology. Manage the situation despite the challenges. Self-regulation, regulating your own emotions, or finding tools and ways to do that. Breathing,
exactly.
meditation,
Exactly.
prayer, um, walk in nature, drinking water, whatever it works for you. I don't really give people to-dos because at the end of the day, it's really what gravitates to you and your being and what you're actually going to do on a day-to-day basis. And this idea that we can create from our community, our environment, this social support theory, as they call it, is really, 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 really powerful. I'll be honest, Karen, I didn't use it in mine. I just saw it as a challenge. And I told everyone around me, I love you, but I need to walk and walk this path in and of myself. Somehow I need to find the way to heal because I often say, and I'll say it until I leave this planet, that healing doesn't always occur in the doctor's office. I thank my care team. They were wonderful. The healing doesn't always occur in the chemo bed. Healing occurs in many different ways, in mysterious ways that we
Yeah.
don't know. It's our job to be aligned to where that is and how we can sustain that and make it an everyday thing. So beyond all that, I would probably say the end thing that I want to leave people is that at the end of the day, people talk about this idea of purpose, like what's my purpose, what's my purpose? But we need to think more macro. Think
Yeah,
about it. We are living on this planet, this giant rock in space, suspended, okay, along with other planets that we haven't really reached.
exactly.
What's the collective purpose of all of us here? Maybe the collective purpose is that we need to share, learn, grow, and evolve together and stop being so divisive with our thoughts. Like, I agree that there's some things that I hold truth on, but I was taught a long time ago that at the end of the day, just because you find error in truth doesn't mean you should discard the truth. It's just an error in the truth. You can find other truths because truth sometimes evolves and grows, and there's ways and means to understand that. So I just want people just really to understand that even though you might not agree with someone, we are collectively here fulfilling some level, whether you believe in destiny, whatever the case may be, we're fulfilling. So the key is to try to get more in touch with yourself so that you can be a reflection to other people in a positive way.
Oh, I love that. You so are speaking my tunes. I love it. I could speak here all day with you because I just love these conversations. They're so inspiring because I don't know where you began your journey, but I mean, I was a doormat back in the day and I was a people pleaser, and I would never even think of like any of this stuff today if I didn't choose to change it because it didn't feel good. And I went, so I get more into the emotional and the mental aspect of it as well, because there's such joy in it when we
Yeah.
allow, you know.
I can speak very candidly. So, as a journalist, I was invited to cover the red carpet at the Oscars a few weeks ago in
Nice.
LA, and I'm there. And by the way, it's beautiful what you see, but behind the scenes, it's a chaotic mess. But beyond that, I actually wrote because I have a weekly newsletter, and I wrote about this idea of belonging. Do I belong in a sea of Hollywood's elites? Then I realized that the people who we deem as celebrities, they're living and acting a certain way for their managers, for the press,
Exactly.
for their handlers. So, are we really being authentic in that moment? And it wasn't lost on me to experience. I'm so happy I was given the assignment. I'm so happy that I did it. But it was a wake up call for myself as well. And so I write from the heart, from the three brains, head, heart, and gut every week. And so I
Love it.
really make it a point to make people to understand that everyone has these titles and things attached to their name, but at the end of the day, we're just living and breathing. And we really, it's us about sharing and giving and service and work and love. Those things will never end.
I couldn't agree with you more. Savio, it's been such an honor and a pleasure. I'm so grateful that we both had the time together today. All of your contact information will be in the show notes, and that'll be posted. Is there something that or some other that I don't have that you'd like to leave the listening audience with? Where you can contact you, or where we could find your book, or
Sure.
you're going to give me all that information anyway, and I'll put that in the show notes, but something that,
Sure. So they can find all my information on my website. So it's Savio, Savio, P is my middle initial, Clemente, CLEMENTE.com. On there, I talk about my newsletter, weekly newsletter, where I go into the head, heart, and gut, different aspects of overcoming adversity. They can, at this point, I think I only have two more options for my 90-day coaching program because I only have a limited amount of bandwidth, and I preach this idea of not burning out. So I want to make sure I don't burn out as well. They can view my TEDx talk on there as well. And then on social media, I'm at The Human Resolve on all the platforms.
beautiful, beautiful. And after this, if you'll send me the information as well, I'll make sure to post all of that on there.
Sure.
Um, Thank you, thank you, thank you. It has just been, you lit me up. So I'm trusting
But
you'll light other people up there as well. And I really honor the work that you're doing out there. It's just brilliant. So thank you.
thanks, Karen. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. And for all of you listening today to on the Awakening Potential podcast, as you step back into the world, remember the bridge from ordinary to extraordinary is built with small steps of change and big leaps of faith. So let today's insights from Savio be a guiding light as you navigate your own journey. Until next time, continue to awaken your potential and illuminate the extraordinary within. Be inspired. Bye for now.